I think this is a demonically inspired dynamic. Those who want to be rulers of the earth are the ones who will gain. If you ask me who they are, I'd say I can't fully identify them, but the would-be elite certainly include monarchies. They include high-level politicians like Gorbachev. They include corporatists like Rockefeller and people of that ilk. You certainly look at the Trilateral Commission and see 80 members of that organization that would gain greatly. It's really about power and control, and there's always been human beings that want power and control, and technology today gives some of those human beings, after they've consolidated that economic power, the ability to gain that control. And we can certainly sit out there and see how youth and the population generally have been educated, that there are simply too many people in the world, and so they've got this blind support from people who don't understand what they're doing or what the consequences would be.
Way back from the Illuminati.
Well, that's, secret organizations are certainly part of it. Yes, ma'am.
Are you familiar with Common Core?
Well, Common Core is the big dumb down of the American educational system, so yes, for people who want to know more about Common Core, I would suggest tapping into Charlotte Iserby. She had been in the education department in the Reagan administration, and she's elderly, but she is productive. She's written a great book, The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, so people focused on educational aspects of Agenda 21 should definitely be aware of the work that Charlotte Iserby has done.
How do you spell that?
I-S-E-R-B-Y-T.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
You talked a lot about the private rights, but I'm curious about what would you guys advise with the big land grab we've got going on now, all the National Forest Bureau and Land Management, as far as road closure? Where do you start with that? Is that
You got to go. The counties can stop that. The sheriffs can't stop that. We just need to educate them. Otero County has stopped that. Any roads there that were built prior to 1976, they will not allow it. The sheriff is very well informed in that county. The county takes no federal dollars whatsoever, zero. So in Otero County, to give an example, the BLM has proposed a three-county land use agreement, and so I was called to find out what they should do. They were thinking they had to respond to this thing, and I said, don't even go there. What they're trying to do is erode your sovereignty of the county. Don't just send them a letter telling them you're not going to participate. They did.
But that is the key then, is that there's also, don't get the federal dollars.
Yeah, because once you accept any kind of benefit, there's always a string attached, as Michael was saying. And so usually there's some sort of agreement. It complicates things. So the best thing to do is, if your county can do without it, get rid of your dog catcher or anything else, just balance the budget, don't take the federal dollars.
See, part of the problem, I'm from Oregon, so there's a number of counties in Oregon, and I made my living in the timber industry, and you know what's happened to that. The problem is there's a lot of the counties that are basically broke. So where you were getting the timber dollars in and help with the roads and the schools and everything, counties don't have any money at all. They've done away with the federal programs. Now they've weaned it off where you got money in lieu of, because of the huge, ownership that you have of public ground. So I don't see how these counties can wean themselves off of whatever dollars they can find whatsoever.
Well, you'd be surprised how you can get by, how the counties can get by without funding. We all do it in our personal lives. When we lose our jobs, the business cycle, it goes downwards, we tighten up. We need to do the same thing at the county level. people need to put pressure on the county commissioners. They're always, they're like a bunch of parasites. They're always looking for money. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to say that.
That was a joke, he didn't mean to say that. There's a question from the back.
My name's John Smith, and I'm from here. We're locally fighting these road closures, and we're now at county level. We're demanding some action as we speak. Somewhat wishy-washy support so far from local entities, and I think the city council is locally involved themselves in. Recently writing a resolution to reform that. The county has a resolution from 2008 that they have done nothing with, except they're glad to do nothing. We're asking them to get off the bus and get it going. So, anybody from the county wants to, or from the county assistance, City, Dorris, Steve Valley, let's get started, let's get a hold of them, put a fire in their ass, and let's get this thing.
Yeah. Get rid of them.
You know, I would add to what this gentleman just said. I sit on the board of the Department of Agriculture in Nevada, and we've had matters come before us that were, that could have, if we voted the wrong way, put us in the situation of being personally liable. When a public official steps outside the law and infringes on your rights, they step outside their protection, their immunity. And in my situation, I would have to pony up my homeowner's policy. I think that we need to look at these public officials very carefully. I wrote a note to Danny yesterday as, I don't know, one of you were talking. I said, can we start tarring and feathering again? It would be easier, but frankly, we do need to look at holding our local officials accountable, and we might need to pursue them legally when they step outside their authority.
I'll second that.
Let me make a fast comment. The Supreme Court in a case it was about a 1978 case, New York versus U.S., said clearly, state officials, by consent, cannot enlarge the enumerated powers of the Constitution. And that's what they are doing. They are giving consent, they're agreeing, they're signing on these Agenda 21 things, they're receiving money, there's benefits. A lot of these politicians need to be thrown out. They're getting elected because they're receiving personal benefits of the office, and that is not what our public officials are supposed to be doing. They're taking public money from the public, and they're using it for their own personal gain. And we've got to get more aggressive about going after them. It doesn't matter who they are. They might have been the prom king or something, our best friend. If they're not standing up and protecting your rights, get rid of them. It's a simple task. Our property rights are not political. It's like Michael said, it doesn't matter if it's a Republican, Democrat, it's irrelevant. Our private property rights are not political.
And neither is our freedom. Yes, sir.
As one of 3 Klamath County commissioners, one of our other commissioners here also, we have been laughed at to some extent because our commissioners sent the federal government a tax bill for all the property in Klamath County that is controlled and owned by the federal government. And some people laugh at us for that. They laughed at us somewhat in Washington, D.C., but it's not a laughable matter. The federal government's only paid, I think, last year, $900.
$911.11.
Yeah, and that 11 cents, that's the important part. Everybody paying taxes in the entire Klamath County, so we sent them a tax bill, and it's a serious issue, and we plan on following through.
Good, I congratulate you. What I'm waiting for is for a county to say to the federal government, get out of here. Yes, sir.
I'm a commissioner with Tom Allens in Klamath County, and we joined the American Lands Council to join with that effort to get federal lands ceded back to the appropriate states. If you have seen Ken Ivory, he does a great job of presenting the facts with regard to the First Land Act and how the federal government, quite frankly, doesn't have the responsibility or the authority to manage all these federal lands, and they ought to give it back to the various states. The land was pooled in the beginning in 1780, 4 years into the Revolution, for 3 purposes. The first purpose was to retire public debt. The war was expensive. This is the Revolutionary War. The second purpose was to create new states. Sure enough, continental U.S. has plenty of new states, 57, I think. And the third reason was for no other purpose whatsoever. Nailing the coffin. We need to get our land back.
Yeah. And just to comment on that, if one looks at federal authorities under Article 1, Section 8, when it comes to land holdings, you know, they're entitled to have military bases, post offices, and that's about it. No national parks, no national forests, etc.
I will add to that. In our case, we always, in the request for protection of documents, ask them to produce title. And I think Danny has in his case. They can't produce one shred of evidence of title. But I will say, it's important to understand the property rights that all, I've said this, Grant Gerber and Joe Dahl, or Demar Dahl, and a lot of those folks with American Land Rights, Joe, they were instrumental in founding that organization. They're good friends of mine. But one of the things that needs to be understood is that many of the rights that can be conveyed have already been conveyed. That's what our whole case was about on these so-called public lands. And so you have a mix of them not having any title that they can produce or will produce, them having basically only a proprietorial interest out there. The problem is they are asserting power they simply don't have. And the first evidence of that is that the BLM guy driving around in a cop car around your county, same with the Forest Service guy. He's not a police officer of any sort. And, but they're impersonating law enforcement officers. So anyway, we've all been fighting this battle for a long, hard time. I will add one word of caution on that. I remember the Sagebrush Rebellion in Nevada. And when we fight these issues, we have to be very careful to make sure we have our I's dotted and T's crossed and have a complete understanding of how to handle those problems. There's no bigger fan than me for getting rid of the wolves, I mean the Forest Service and BLM out of these areas.
Let me add to that. The only place in the Constitution where Congress has been granted any authority is under Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2. And the only authority that they've been granted is the power of disposal. There's no provisions anywhere in the Constitution for them to own or retain land unless it complies with Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. Other than that, we need to ask them to leave and turn off the lights as they leave.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's time for one more question. I'm Roy Hall, I'm chairman of the Shasta Nation. Our Aboriginal lands encompass Josephine, Jackson, Siskiyou, and most of Shasta County. And we have unextinguished titles to all of those lands. So basically, the federal government, the state of Oregon, and California have no title to the land and no legal jurisdiction. So we have a foot up on it from the get-go. We need to use it.
Anyone in the audience have a comment or response they want to make?
I just have a question of Casey. When they figure the deprivation amount, is that based on market value or what?
Yeah, the precedence was set with the Defenders of Wildlife with their initial agreement to provide compensation for depredation. And so you have to, when they were involved, you have to show current market reports, and claim what your cattle were at the time. And so I argued specifically that, you know, if you're having a 200-pound calf killed, you know, it's worth $200. And I argued with them because of our management, we take these cattle to finish. And so at every stage, either at weaning or a yearling or at the phase in finishing, that we are giving up opportunity costs along the way. And so I demanded that we be paid our finished product, because that's where we take them. Other people were accepting them at weaning, but I just felt I had a pretty good argument that, you know, this is our program, this is what we do, and if we give up, we will give up our opportunity costs throughout the process. So, but when we would submit our claims to the Defenders of Wildlife, you know, it has to come with that confirmation from your trapper, because he was the agent. And then you have to have the documentation of the market and numbers and dates and everything there. Well, then it's 6 months later, they call back and start arguing and wrangling over the market value. And so you might submit it, and a year later you might get paid. Well, it was never the rancher's intent to be basically to get paid on the depredations. You know, we'd rather have the opportunity to do what we do, and that's raise beef. And then, of course, Defenders backed out, and they wanted to take all their funds and put it towards flagging and education and how to train the ranchers to live with the wolves, and that's where their efforts are going now. And so the federal government picked up on that. They started kicking money back to the states, mainly Montana and Idaho. And then as the wolves move, they pick up other ones. But those funds were only available for about 2 years. And like I said, last year, there was no money kicked. The money might have got kicked back from the federal government, but it's hung up, and it's not flowing back to Idaho to go to the producers. So we did not receive any last year. And one thing I usually say in my talk, and I missed today, so I'll just take a minute to say it. In 2009, you know, I had 20 confirmed cases. I was short 70 head of calves, 5 cows, 2 yearlings, and a bull. Well, and on top of that, we figured our loss in body condition on the cows, the extra wintering costs it took to get those cows back up into shape, and the loss of the cows in the production on the conception rates. And as near as I could figure, our ranch was right at $250,000 of losses from these wolves. So it's not much money when you start thinking about billions, and now that's trillions. You know, nobody's talking in millions anymore, so $250,000 don't amount to much, but it is quite a bit. You know, you could go down and you could buy a new pickup, or you could update your tractor, or you could do some things with that money, and yet we don't have it.
One more question. What's the probability of that Oregon wolf traveling all the way from Idaho to Oregon to California without any assistance?
You know, I think it's really probable. They've had some wolves that were collared in Montana as well, all the way to Utah. I think it's very probable that, yeah, he's moving. I'm not saying he's alone. He's probably got some help. But, you know, it's going to happen and it's going to come. That's what it amounts to. Yeah, he might have been tethered to a snowbird travel trailer as he's coming down. I don't really know. And, you know, I was asked last night when we were at a get-together last night, well, what are the remedies? maybe I haven't said anything like that. I really feel that if in Idaho, if we was able to do what the original agreement was, and that was 15 breeding pairs in the state, and not over 150 wolves in the state, that we probably wouldn't be having that conversation. But you got to remember, when the pioneers come into this country, they displaced the wolves. And then, as the reintroduction took place and the control measures that were imposed, the wolves started displacing the people. And we've seen that in Idaho. You know, we have ranchers that have just completely gave up and have sold all their cattle. But, you know, some of the value in that ranch is the wildlife and things like that. And now the wildlife's gone. So it's a snowball effect. It kind of plays in right where these gentlemen are talking. But because that 15 breeding pairs and 150 wolves was the goalpost, it's when we got there, that's when they kept moving the goalpost farther down the field. That's when the lawsuit started. We never got the wolves off the endangered list until their official count was almost 1,000. And in reality, it was probably 2,000 wolves. And the professor out of Alberta said that they have these same problems in Canada. And he said for years and years and years we had a fur trade. And so the trappers was always pushing back on the wolves. And the ranchers were always pushing back on the wolves. And he said as the fur trade died out, and we had all over the world, if you put a fur on, you were criticized, that pushback quit. And then as those pushbacks quit, the wolves just are very intelligent and they just keep moving in closer and closer and closer. And that's what we've seen with the reintroduction. Yes, sir.
Fur trade ain't dead. Excuse me, but it is.
No, but it went through a phase. It went through a phase that really went downhill. And what I'm doing, I'm quoting what happened with the professor who was talking about in Canada.
Okay.
Okay, but
a real good book for all of you to read, and it's called Wolf of Alaska, written by Jim Reardon. And I got a daughter that lives up there, and she can verify it. And it's just something you ought to read, where they manage the wolves. I'm not saying that the wolves are good at all.
Oh, yeah.
They're not.
Right.
But they manage the wolves as to the whole overall picture.
Right.
Now, the courts in California tried to get in the middle of it because the area fund, they hunt hard. And if they need to get them out of the watershed or something, they get them out of it. And they don't allow them to pack up in a lot of them in one area. And I think it's going to be very hard to get rid of the wolves because of the public.
Well, yeah, and I thoroughly agree. And what they've done, they've allowed them to get to a level in Idaho that, you know, there's a huge outcry when we take 200 wolves. You know, and that's the whole point. They might be fine in a certain number.
We've got to get the management back to the states and then get rid of the PETA people that are in the management.
Well, and we have gotten that back in Montana and Idaho both. But you have officials in there that has also changed. See, we originally agreed at 150 wolves in Idaho. They are not going to allow those wolves in Idaho to ever go below 450. Okay? So that's 300 more than was originally talked about. And so you have officials in there now that have also moved the goalpost. And so it's a very, very difficult deal.
Okay, thank you very much.
I want to tell people from California, or a paper in Clement Falls, made a statement in the paper that the last wolves in California was 1924. In 1958, or 48, 5 days a week in the Sierras. Every day I was there, I seen at least 2 black wolves, big black wolves. Yeah. One night I woke up, one was driven a slap on my face. So you still have wolves in California. I don't care what they say.
Go ahead, sir.
I'm not a professor like the person you were quoting, but I am a cattle rancher, and 10 or 12 years ago, I was running cattle in British Columbia, way up in British Columbia. If anybody's familiar with it, we were 225 miles to the nearest town, which was Williams Lake, which isn't much of a town. But we were there. We had a herd of cattle we took up from Oregon. We were there for a few years. I wondered about the wolves, which we had, and the grizzly bears and the black bears. And where we were, people seemed to have a way of pushing back, and we had no losses. And it enters my mind that, for example, in Idaho, I sell bulls to people in your area, and they talk about all the predation losses in mature cows. And if you were pushing back, I mean, if you had the law on your side, you could do it. Shoot at them when you see them and that sort of thing. They don't seem to come around as much. That was our experience in Canada.
But isn't that the problem?
We were enough cattle, and we were there long enough, and we didn't have any losses.
Well, you know, it's a good point. And the trouble was we were not allowed to push back when we had the opportunity to. And then the population got so big that, you know, the efforts is really hard to do, especially in our area that's so steep and rugged and stuff. So it is difficult, very difficult.
We're going to have to cut it here, I think, but those who have questions, you can grab hold of one of us and ask it. Thank you very much for being here.